how to lift heavy and not hurt yourself. Strength training is becoming more and more prominent in media. So what we want to be able to do is do it properly. So what we're going to look at is 5 different ways that you can lift heavy without hurting yourself. If you want to build your overall body strength, please do click the link below and go through to my How to Build Strength newsletter, where you'll learn more about strength training for bones, for muscle health, but also strength training in general. So number 1 is using the right weight. Now, there are a couple of things that will come with this. One is, when we're talking about strength training, we're talking about doing, say, no more than 6 reps. Could be 5, could be 4, could be 3, could be 2, could be 1. Doesn't really matter. So we're talking about using a weight that we can perform 6 reps with. So, albeit this isn't the weight that I would choose, so I've got 2 16 kilo kettlebells here. Throughout this, I'm going to be using the example of a deadlift. You could use bench press, squat, back squat, front squat, deadlift, bench press, cable row, bench row, dumbbell row. There are a lot of exercises that you could use, but with regards to choosing the right weight, number 1, we would aim at, say, 6 reps. The second thing is, when we're performing those 6 reps, can we hold the body in position? So if we take the deadlift as the example, so lifting up off the floor, what we would do is we would come into this position and we would lift. Okay? So there's a few things that we need to be mindful of when we're lifting. One is the torso. So if I lift, I come into this position, I've got my spine in a good position, but if I lift and that happens, that shows this weight is too heavy for my torso. So I need to go down the weight until I can hold that position. If I come to the front, another one is what the knees do. So I've got my feet in a good position, they're pointing forward, I'm going to go knees out, but if I go into this position and then my knees crumble inwards, then that's possibly a weight that's slightly too heavy. Now, the most important thing is that I can hold that position. So I don't really care what reps you do, I want you to hold the position. So if it means only doing 2 reps, you only do 2 reps. You can lighten the weight and get yourself up to 6 reps. But the main thing is choosing the right weight that you can perform without losing position. So we want to be able, as a very basic rule, there is more to this than what I'm sharing in this tutorial, but this is only a short tutorial. We want to be able to maintain position of the spine when we lift, and we don't want to fall into position as we lift or out of position as we lift, and we don't want our knees to crumble in like that, because that's going to put unnecessary tension through the inside of the knee. Obviously, that's when we round the back, it's going to put unnecessary tension through the back. So the first thing we need to be able to do to lift heavy without hurting ourselves is to hold position. We've talked about the 6 reps. That's kind of our maximum. But essentially, we want to be able to hold position for those 6 reps, or 4 reps, or 5 reps, or whatever it is that we're doing. So we come into position, we hold position, we go up and down, we do 6 reps. That's then the weight that we use for 6 reps. So number 1 is choosing the right weight. Number 2 is the right range of movement. So again, if we use the deadlift as the example, this will be representative of other exercises as well. But as you can see, I've lifted the weight maybe a foot off the floor, maybe a bit less, 10 inches off the floor, whatever. So I can stand over the weight now, I can come down, I can grab onto the weight. I can lift it up and I can do my 6 reps. And then I can go back down, I can place them back down and I can lift them back up again. So why am I lifting them up off the floor? Well, one reason I would lift them up off the floor is if I don't have the hip range of movement. Now, if you haven't got the hip range of movement, you can still do strength training because you can just lift the weight up, which allows you to get into that position and lift. What I would also advise is that you develop your hip range of movement, so you can then lift from the floor. Because what you may find is if you've got the weights on the floor, you can't get down there without folding at the back. So you need that extra sort of 6-8 inches to be able to get into that position so you can lift up. That's where a step can come in, or anything, a couple of plates, weights, that you can just lift it up so you're then able to maintain that position that we talked about when we're using the right weight, but we're also able to lift because we don't have the range of movement. Because all these things can affect lifting heavy, because lifting heavy puts us at a greater risk of injury because of the extra load. So we need to sort of build into it as well, which we'll talk about later on. But number 2 is having the range of movement to be able to lift. And again, as I mentioned, if you can't lift from the floor, you're going to need to be able to raise the weight up so you are then able to lift off of something. Now, one thing that you can do as well, but again, you've got to know your range of movement, is you don't need a step. You could pick them up off a side of a bench, and then you can do a sort of Romanian deadlift style and just go up and down like so without actually putting them down. So that's another way that you can do it. But again, you've still got to know your range of movement, because can you get down that far and then you round? Or can you get down that far and then you round? That's something that needs to be understood before you can really load things up. So you've got, in number 1 that we talked about, using the right weight, so that doesn't pull you out of position. Then we've got to get the range of movement right, so that doesn't pull you out of position. So far, we've got 2 of the variables that could put us at a greater risk of injury, that if we get right, we can get much more out of the muscle than if we were getting them wrong. Number 3 is how to brace. So this is bracing your abdominals. Now, what this is doing, this is pre-tensioning the torso, so we're able to lift a heavier weight. Because if I just go in slack, I've got a greater chance of going into position and just pulling up like that, and my back rounding, and then that putting extra pressure on my back. Or if I go in and I forget and I think, oh, I've started pulling, oh, and now I need to brace, I may have lost the position already. And then I'm holding in a bad position, if that makes sense, or a not as good position, I should say. So what we need to be able to do is brace properly. So we've got an abdominal brace, which is where we pull the abdominals in tight. So they should go nice and solid. If you get your fingers, you should be able to feel that nice and solid all the way from the outside of the torso all the way into the middle. So you've got the abdominals here, and you've got the obliques here. So that's the first part. The second part is to get the hips engaged as well. So how you would do that is you would push your knees out. That will engage the hip muscles. So you've got the abdominals, or the abdominal wall, bracing around the lumbar spine. You've then got the hips bracing for the pelvis. And then the final one is the shoulders, and they just go back and then down into the rib cage. So what you've then got is your whole torso is locked together. Now when you're lifting heavy, this is fine, because you're going to move it in a slow and controlled way. So we're going to come into position, we're going to go down, we're going to grip on tight, we're going to push our shoulders down, tummy tight, glute squeezed, and then we're going to come up. And what that's going to do, that's going to protect the whole torso from all those bending stresses that could potentially pull you out of position that we've talked about already. So we need to be able to brace properly. Obviously, for different exercises, it's a different movement, but you kind of need to do the same bracing. Tummy tight, shoulders back and down, glute squeezed. So that just protects the torso, so that when we're lifting, we've got this solid, so we're able to distribute all those bending stresses and compression stresses and stress concentrations around the torso, rather than directly on the spine or on the pelvis or on the hip joint or whatever it may be. So we need to be able to brace properly, which is, as I mentioned, abs, shoulders back and down, glute squeezed, then do the lift, be it a lift like a deadlift, a squat, a press, or a pull. Those three things need to be done regardless. Number 4, foot or feet and knee position. Now, there's a lot of talk about what needs to happen here, but there are different reasons for doing things depending on why you need to do them. So what I'm going to suggest is that you have either your feet forward or just pointing out ever so slightly. You don't need to go out like this. The reason you don't need to go out like this is because you can't give tension to the hip muscles as well. When you're in this position, your feet are forward and you push the knees out, it's much easier to get tension through the hip muscles than if they're out here, because you haven't got the range of movement to push them out and engage the muscles. When they're in here, or they're just turned out ever so slightly, now the reason you would turn them out ever so slightly would be dependent on sort of the hip mechanics, if you will. Now, again, this isn't a video to go into that, which is why I'm saying either straight forward or slightly out. As a general rule, you'll be able to feel it. If you're in here and you can't get your knees out and they're sort of inside, then you need to just point them out ever so slightly just to get the knees out, and then you can get that tension in the hip. So that's kind of the first thing, is we need the foot either straight or just out so we can get tension in the hip muscles. So when I talked about how to brace, if we go to this position, we can't brace the glutes and the pelvis quite as well. So again, we're not able to lift as heavy a weight. If we come into this position, we are able to do it that much easier. So we get more muscles of the hip working to stabilize the pelvis, which helps support the lower back. That's from the front view. Then we've got the side view. Now, there are people that say we should go knees over toes. There are people that say we should stay back with knees behind the toes. Both have their place, and they both have a different reason. Very simply, if knees go over the toes, more pressure goes on the knees and away from the hip and the lower back. If the knees come back, pressure goes away from the knees, more onto the hips and the lower back. The hips are much stronger muscles to lift with, but if we want to include the quads in the lift a bit more, we bring the knees forward a little bit more. So there is a place for all of it. It just depends on the individual. If you've got history of knee problems, but your hips and lower back are fine, then you probably want to keep the hips back a little bit more. But again, there is a place for you even to bring your knees forward. But with regards to heavy strength training, without addressing that problem, it's probably best just to be on the safe side. We'll just keep the knees back a little bit. Again, it's not the end of the world. People are probably going to tell me, don't do what I'm saying, but it's just being on the erring on the side of caution. As I said, there is a place for people with bad knees to bring their knees forward. I'm just talking about strength training, and without knowing the individual, I'm just saying, just keep it back, just err on the side of that caution. If you've got back problems, it may be worth bringing the knees forward a little bit more, keep the body up a little bit, upright a little bit more. Again, as I said, if you've got back problems, there is a time and a place to go into the hips and the lower back. So we just have to be able to know what to do and when to do it, because all options are on the table. It just depends. When we're lifting heavy, it's probably a good idea to stay away from the lower back to start with. So we just stay a little bit more upright. When we go into a rehab type of phase to the training, then we start building the knees back and the body over and the lift. So again, there's lots of variables that come into it. There's a lot that needs to be understood about the individual. I can't just stand up here and say, this is the way you need to lift, because I don't know who you are, I don't know your injury history, I don't know your genetics in so much as femur length, torso length, shin length, so on and so forth, because all that will influence how you need to lift and how you're going to lift, which are two different things. So that's number 4, which is understanding foot and knee position. But But as long as you understand there is a difference and there is a place for all of the differences, then you're in the best place to understand which one may be most useful for you at your current understanding of lifting heavy. What we're going to do in the next part is talk about reps and sets, which we've kind of introduced already. So how many reps and sets do we do for all of this? Well, as I've mentioned already, maximum of 6 reps. When we're lifting heavy, maximum of 6 reps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. How we know we've got the right weight is if we could maybe do a 7th. But we don't need to do that 7th. But if you're thinking, yeah, I probably could, you've got the right weight. So you would do 6. If you were doing 6, you may do just 3 sets of that. You could go up to 4 sets of 6, but you could just do 6 sets. 3 sets. 3 sets of 6. Then you could do 4 sets of 5, 6 sets of 2, so on and so forth. So you can start to see as the reps go down, the sets can go up, and vice versa. So there's like a seesaw effect with regards to reps and sets. But again, there are a million different options out there. Basically what you're looking for, if it's lifting heavy, is can you maybe do 1 more? So whether you're doing 4 reps, can you maybe do 1 more? Doing 1 rep, can you maybe do 1 more? You're doing 6 reps, can you maybe do 1 more? And you kind of want that on every set that you do. With regards to rest, it needs to be a longer rest, because you always want to have that 1 rep in the bank. So your rest would be longer. Now, if you are a beginner to this, you will need to build into this. So everything that I've talked about, if you've never done exercise before, you probably don't want to start with strength training. You're probably going to want to start with muscular endurance type of training, building up core strength, building range of movement, and then moving into strength training. You will build strength doing that, but it's not out and out sort of maximum strength. There will be a certain degree of strength and endurance that you will gain early on, but you won't be putting your deconditioned body under that much stress. So you build a bit of condition, you build a bit of capacity, and then you move into the heavier 6 rep training. What you can then do is then be a little bit more adventurous with the weights that you choose and the reps and sets that you do, and then you get the luxury of a slightly longer break in between the exercises. So that will hopefully give you an idea of reps and sets. With regards to how many times you do it a week, you mainly do strength training twice a week, which again is advantageous because it doesn't sap up as much time, but you will get the benefits of bone health, muscle health. You're working against sort of the loss of bone density. You're also working against something called sarcopenia. So you've got osteopenia and osteoporosis, and you've got sarcopenia, which are bone loss and muscle loss. That process slows down, and you can also sort of reverse it ever so slightly, but you'll maintain muscle mass and bone density much more effectively if you're using strength training at 6 reps or below. If you've enjoyed this content, please do hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you want to watch more of this content, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. And if you've got a comment or a question, stick it down in the comment section below.